Hello, everyone. My name is Gilda Ross. I'm the Glenbard Student and Community Projects Coordinator. I am thrilled that you could be with us today because today we are welcoming back one of my, I was going to say one of my, and I will say my favorite, Dr. Lisa Damour, who is in conversation with a dear friend, and I know she'll be a good friend to us as well here at GPS, Susan Dominus. It is the 30th year of the GPS Parent Series. We couldn't be more excited about the lineup that we have. If you haven't already checked out this brochure, please do. You will find 50 programs in 4 different languages at noon and at 7 o'clock with some of the most important thought leaders on the planet. So please, our ask of you is to please share, let everyone know that they are welcome to join us here at GPS. So these are some of the books that are sitting at my nightstand. This is Untangled, which is a new and revised edition. And I'm really excited to tell you that Lisa's coming back soon, October 30th. This is another one that absolutely can't be missed. And now a new favorite, The Family Dynamic, our topic today. I want to quickly tell you about upcoming events that are happening at GPS. We're off to a big start next week. On September 3rd, we're welcoming Martha Beck. She'll be talking about her new book about anxiety and creativity. You won't want to miss that. And then the following week, we're welcoming a local celebrity, Bill Cartwright of the Chicago Bulls. He will be with us in person at Glenbard West at 7 p.m., giving away copies of his book. And we're also raffling off 3 copies today of Susan's book. So be sure to look for that. If we circle back to you, you know you've got a book coming your way, and there are a lot of them. So I'm thrilled about that. And then we're also welcoming that second week of September. We'll be talking about raising good human beings with Hunter Clark Fields. And then mid-September, we're welcoming also favorites of ours. Susan Kane will be talking about her book, The Community Read Quiet. She'll be in conversation with Dr. Scott Gary Kaufman. So go to the website, find the information, share, and let everyone know. We've got so much to talk about today, so let's get right into it. I'm so pleased to introduce to you our new superintendent for the Glenbard Schools, Jessica Santee. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Gilda. Always love to be here with GPS and so excited to hear our talk today. So I have the honor and privilege of introducing our distinguished guests today. So I'm going to read a little bit about them and give them their proper introduction. So thanks for joining us. So Susan Dominus is the author of the celebrated The Family Dynamic, a journey into the mystery of sibling success, and has worked for the New York Times since 2007. First as a Metro columnist and then as a staff writer for the New York Times Magazine. In 2018, she was part of a team that won a Pulitzer Prize for its reporting on workplace sexual harassment. She has won awards from the Newswomen's Club of New York, the New York Press Club, and won a National Magazine Award for a New York Times Magazine article in 2024. She has studied as a fellow at the National Institutes of Health and Yale Law School and currently teaches journalism at Yale University. Dominus will be in conversation with noted clinical psychologist Dr. Lisa Damour, a good friend to GPS. Dr. Damour has been called a thought leader by the American Psychological Association, was a consultant to Pixar on the film Inside Out, and is a regular contributor to CBS News. She is the award-winning author of 3 New York Times bestsellers, Under Pressure, The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, and Untangled. Happy news, Dr. Damour will be returning to GPS on October 30th to discuss her revised and updated edition of Untangled. So we are very delighted to welcome these distinguished authors to GPS today, and I'm excited to learn from both of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Love GPS. Thank you for having me back. It's always an honor, and I'm so excited to be here with Sue Dominus, who is such a brilliant and wonderful thinker and writer. Those of you who are joining us, if you read a piece in the New York Times Magazine that you're like, oh my gosh, that was so interesting, I love it, I promise you Susan wrote it. Like, her stuff is just spectacular. Okay, so I had an early look at this phenomenally interesting book about kids and kids growing up in families and what family life does as a dynamic around young people, especially in the context of sibling relationships. But so much of the book applies to kids from all kinds of families, kids who have no siblings. There's so much wisdom and so much insight in it. So Susan, let's get down to business. I want to ask you all these questions. You ready?
I'd be thrilled. Yes.
Okay. So the book itself weaves together the stories of six really remarkable families who have more than one kid who has done by, kind of outward measures extremely well. What got you asking this question? Like, what made you want to look at siblings and sibling success in particular, as opposed to, say, like individual achievements?
I would start by saying that I set out to write a book about how parents influence their children's capacity to dream big and aim very, very high. I was interested in families in which more than one sibling hadn't just, done well for himself or herself, but had really, been an innovator or a trailblazer. And so I looked for families that fit that description or, and who would also talk to me. Family life is very private. And it was really only in the reporting that, and the reason I was interested in families with multiple siblings was because if one kid hits it out of the park, then you can think like, oh, that kid was just gifted, or something lined up just right for that child. But when you have one of those families with numerous siblings who are all really doing innovative, interesting, trailblazing work, then you have to think there's something going on at home that's helping that happen. So that was the original interest in multiples. Um, when I started doing my reporting, I kept asking about parent child relationships, and there is plenty of that in this book. That is a huge part of the book. But eventually, I started to realize that the siblings also had major effects on each other. And when I would ask them, well, how did you land that job that got you to the next phase? Eventually, it would become clear that maybe a sibling had made an introduction, or a sibling had suggested it, or a sibling had a vision for another younger sibling that was more ambitious than the sibling herself maybe would have thought of for herself. So I got really interested in the sibling dynamic at that point. And that's why the book ended up being called The Family Dynamic, because it wasn't just about how parents help their children succeed, it was about the whole family system.
I love that. I also just writer to writer, like you go into a book with one idea.
Yes.
And as you start actually doing the work,
Yeah.
it teaches you something new. It's really like kind of a like I love writing books because I learn so much. Like it's a learning process for me.
It's so true. I mean, often when I start to write a New York Times article, the people I'm interviewing say, well, tell me what your angle is. And I always say, I don't know what my angle is. I'm just starting the reporting. If I knew my angle, I wouldn't be doing my job. And, it's great to be open-minded. And even the families themselves, it was interesting. They didn't always recognize until I pointed out to them that when they actually got drilled down, the sibling had made such a difference. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. But it was just hearing those stories over and over again and starting to see the more you report among different families, you start to see the parallels, and just a pattern became really clear to me.
Isn't that neat? Like it just sort of like it teaches itself to you. It's a sort of an extraordinary thing.
It's the joy of being a reporter is how much you learn every day. I feel very,
Yeah,
very fortunate. Yeah.
it's the coolest. It's the coolest. Okay. So one subset of families that you talk to have what you call like so-called thwarted parents, parents who had their own ambitions that they could not themselves realize. And that you found that for their kids, there was often a lot of success side by side with some damage along the way. Um, how
Yeah.
can readers, especially like, see, first of all, agree or don't agree with that premise? Like, I want you to unpack that. But also, from what you learned, what would you guide families on if they want to like encourage without harming?
I think that there are two different families in the book that are kind of case studies in ideally how these things unfold. Um, the term, what I mean by thwarted parents is that there seemed to be a theme in a lot of the families in which there was a parent who had a talent or a vision or a dream or a lot of ambition. And because of timing or circumstance or sexism or racism, they couldn't actually achieve it at the time when it would have been their moment. But those kids, I sometimes, maybe a more positive spin is I think of the children of those parents as like the finishing children. Like, my friend Nell Casey told me that was a family term that they use sometimes when they observe it. The child finishes what the parent, started, basically. So that's kind of a more positive way of looking at it. But in one of the families, there was a mother who had known that she was extremely talented and bright, but because of the family culture in which she grew up, actually in China, her father didn't allow her to go to high school. And in fact, the teachers would knock on her door and say, "Why isn't she coming to school?" And it was because the father needed her to help him run the business. And he actually, I think there's a story about he actually like burned her books one day. You know, it was like this really tragic story. And I think that there was a lot of anger and disappointment in her that she took out on her children. Now, because she had so much energy when she moved to America, she ended up having 4 children. She was able to like summon all these resources and that fire in her belly to find for these very bright kids who were living basically in Appalachia, the best music instructors who were available to persuade them to do it, you know, at very low fees to teach her kids. But she also really was very verbally abusive towards her children, and in fact, physically abusive, as her parents before her had been towards her. And you know, those kids have succeeded, but the cost of the relationship is obviously something that I know the children mourn. I wasn't able to get that close to the mother to know, but certainly they grieve and they suffer tremendous anxiety and stomach aches. And, you know, there's a lot that comes with that. One of the last chapters about the book is about a woman named Diane Paulus and her siblings. Diane Paulus is most famous for being the director behind Jagged Little Pill, and she's one of the most innovative female directors working today, and a real bright light in theater and a real go-getter. Was one of the first women to win a Tony Award for her work. And her father, I think, I know her father had wanted to be a director as well. He loved theater. He loved acting. He ended up being kind of an arts producer at CBS television in its heyday, and then became like a middle manager and was definitely thwarted and disappointed. But he maintained this exuberance around theater that was joyful and exciting, and it didn't feel demanding. It wasn't like the kids had to go to the theater, but it was playful. And even the 2 siblings who succeeded in their own right in fields that were not theater, he had them memorizing the brother and a sister memorizing lines from Romeo and Juliet, because he told them, one day you're going to do Shakespeare in the park, you know, because he was. So I think it's like, if parents can hold on to the thing that made them love whatever it is that they love in the first place and pass on that joy, then I think that's really healthy. So it's just about a feeling of contagious enjoyment without pressure, basically.
Like a shared pleasure. Like, I love this, you can love it with me.
Yes,
What you do with it, I'm not attached to, but I want you to.
yes. And that's funny that you talk about not attached to it, because Diane's mother also was an extraordinary woman in her own right. But Diane talks about how her mother, who was Japanese, actually an immigrant, had a way of, when Diane as a little girl danced with the American Ballet Theater, which she did, or when she had a piano recital, her mother was present. And her mother also loved theater, loved the arts, but her mother had a way of watching without desire, meaning her ego was not bound up with Diane's performance. It was always Diane's performance. It wasn't a reflection on her. It wasn't a proxy for who she was. She wasn't living through Diane vicariously. It was Diane being Diane, and her mother simply enjoying it. Her mother never gave her. I mean, I think this is really fascinating as a mother myself, I played some piano myself. I loved it. My son, frankly, has surpassed me, but of course I still have opinions. And I honestly, before I wrote this book, I just couldn't help myself. I sometimes would say, you know, I think you want a lighter touch in the beginning. And now I really think what he wants is for me to sit there and enjoy it and just let it wash over me. He's got a piano teacher. He doesn't need mom to tell him, you know, how to do it better. And just to enjoy his enjoyment, I think, you know, that's a theme that comes up a lot in the book. It's letting the teachers teach, letting the coaches coach. You be a parent, you be a safe space. You are there to be enthusiastic, to expose your child, to enjoy their enjoyment, but create if you find yourself on the sidelines of a soccer game and people are looking at you because you're yelling a little enthusiastically, or you're husband or wife is yanking at your shirt sleeve. Yeah, you've got, and by the way, I went through this myself. I spent a lot of time thinking, why do I care so much? You know, whether my kid succeeds on this, what is this even about? But I do think a huge amount of this that's really healthy for kids is when their parents step back and let go.
Now, one thing, I have so much respect for you generally, and under that heading, when I'm reading these books about parenting loosely by people who are not clinicians, I'm always watching, like, how do they navigate that line of advice giving or not? And you are so disciplined and so ethical and so careful, right? Like, you're not out of your lane, is what I would say. And yet, I'm going to double down as a clinician on everything you just said.
Oh, phew.
Right? Like, absolutely, absolutely. So, like, you don't overstep in terms of saying, like, let me give you all parenting guidance, but I get to do that. And I would say, like, everything Susan just said, right? Everything Susan just said about excitement about kids' interests and achievement, but a divorce between their ownership of it, like, letting it be theirs, and you just are a delighted spectator. I think that is
Oh, that's a great.
such an important thing. Such
Delighted spectator. I love that. I also think that we know that just to bring in some of the research that you're probably more familiar with than I am, but we know that when little children are doing puzzles, if their parents intervene quickly to solve the puzzle for them, that the kids lose motivation. The next time they're given the puzzle, they try less hard. They're less excited about it. And I think it's kind of a great metaphor for parenting in general. I mean, obviously, what happens with toddlers doesn't extrapolate perfectly to teenagers, but I think it is really easy to sap kids' ambition.
Mm.
It's not just about like emotional health, like we want them to feel valued for who they are outside of their accomplishments, but it also might have the opposite effect of what you're going for. You are wanting to jump in and help with that essay or give some positive feedback on how they can make that piano piece a little more beautiful. But when you intervene or you do some of that work for them, it's actually going to have the opposite effect. It's going to demotivate them. You start kind of a vicious cycle where you're doing, you can start doing more of the heavy lifting. And this is research that, people like Julia Leonard at Yale have done, and it's quite persuasive.
No, it's makes so much sense. And I just want to also just underscore something you said, like, doing the right thing is hard. Like, it is actually
Oh my
hard.
gosh, yes.
And I say this as a mother myself, right? Watching your kid and you're like, oh, I know I have so much I could offer here. And
Yeah.
so I think it's useful for us together as the adults around this to be like, we're going to do the right thing. But that doesn't mean we don't actually have to it's a workout, right? It's a workout to do the right thing. And I think if we can acknowledge that together, it's easier to do that workout.
I think you're right. It requires some self-knowledge and some discipline and a conscious thought in your head. And I will say, it is fascinating to me that I did have to, familiarize myself with these stories and really get to know these parents in order to, it's not easy to change your parenting, period, right? Like forget this one little way we're asking parents to think about maybe distancing yourself from your kids' accomplishments, don't intervene. Changing your parenting in general, it's like trying to change, the air you breathe or the color of your hair, which I guess is easier to do than a lot of things. But it's just, but I really did make a concerted effort after, really enmeshing myself in these stories and seeing how, when do kids want to please their parents? They want to please their parents when they respect their parents. And one of the things that a lot of the young people I interview or older people, what I could hear that they respected about their parents was that they weren't overly involved in their children's lives. There's a great line from Wynton Marsalis, who's one of a group of brothers who are all extraordinarily musical, disciplined, successful musicians. Their father was a legendary music teacher. And, an interviewer once asked Wynton Marsalis, did your father make you practice? And he just said, no, he was too cool for that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. He just led by example.
He
Just led by example.
respected his father. He wanted to impress his father, but his father did not get him to respect him by forcing him, by making him do things. Like I've come to feel that when you start to think like, well, I just need to make her finish the sentence. I'll take a step back, revisit that sentence. Making kids do things. No, very
Oh,
realistic.
and I will, you can make kids under 10 do things. As soon as you're trying to make an adolescent, 11 you're sunk. You can. I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
I've written about this. Like I had this kid come in one day to my practice where I am right now. She was in the worst mood, and I was like, "What's going on?" She's like, "I was about to clean my room, and then my mom told me to clean my room, and so I got into a fight with her, and I used all the time I was going to spend cleaning my room fighting with her, and now I'm really upset that my room's not cleaned up." I was like, "Bingo, there it is, teenagers."
I actually even remember feeling that way myself as an
Yeah,
adolescent. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. They
Absolutely.
can be on the way to do it, and if you suggest it, it's kiss of death. Okay, fantastic. You talk about luck, which I really loved in your book, right? I think that's such an important thing to acknowledge that, yeah, hard work goes far, but it has to also have a context around it that allows that hard work to actually pay off in the ways that, people want it to. So luck in genetics, luck in timing, luck in privilege. Um, how did you like talk us through this? Like, what did you come to see about how luck plays into these stories?
I felt like it was important to acknowledge the role of luck because it came up so apparently. I mean, there's one set piece in a chapter about these two twin sisters who were both up for a prominent leadership camp, let's say, called Girls State, and two kids from their high school were going to go, and these two young women were the stars of their high school. They were identical twins, and um, the woman who was making the decision about who was going to go didn't think they both should go. Who knows why? She thought it was weird to send identical twins, and she flipped a coin to decide who was going to go. And the power of that coin flip, the woman who went to the girl who went to Girls State ended up going to Girls Nation because she was so successful. And then that led her to a life working in DC. By the time she was 30, she was flying around the world with a congressman, and um, meeting with heads of state, and became part of Clinton's inner circle. Her identical twin sister had a very successful career in her own right. And by the way, she ended up the chief judge of the Ninth Circuit. So, the talent kind of outed eventually, but she lived at home until she was 30 in, a very repressive Mexican American family. So you can't, when you hear a story like that, you have to recognize the role of luck and how people's lives play out. But I also thought it was important to talk about luck, to remind parents, and I think this is a healthy thing for parents to remember, is they can't control everything. And why is it important for parents to internalize that for their own mental health, first of all, but also for their kids too? When kids don't get that leadership medal at summer camp, not that I'm speaking of anything specific, but to tell them that, like, maybe the counselor who would have advocated for you that day was on his day off, or the kid who did win happened to like have a sweet exchange 20 minutes before the meeting was held with the director of the camp. Like, there is an element of luck, and that is both humbling for those who do achieve, appropriately so, and it is a true consolation for those moments when a kid doesn't succeed at the level they wanted. And it's not to say that like hard work isn't rewarded and it's not meaningful, but when you're really getting to, lives that have, tremendous impact, or, people who are trailblazers, a lot of things had to go right. And luck is, in fact, one of those things. So I just felt like it was important to talk about it.
I love it. I love it. Do you also feel Well, I'll tell you what I feel. Then you see if you feel like the same way.
I'm always interested in everything you have to
Um,
say. So.
so, I've had the benefit of practicing now for 30 years, which is like an unbelievable thing. Because sometimes I've had families that I've woven in and around with for a lot of that time, at least certainly 25 years since I've been in the same community. And you do see things sometimes break a kid's way, sometimes not break a kid's way. What I feel I can say over watching the long arc, if everybody keeps trying to do the right thing,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
family and the kid, it sorts itself out. But sometimes it is a very long arc. Does that feel like that
Yeah, I mean, I
matches?
absolutely believe that's true, because you see it in Mary Murguia, who became the chief judge of the Ninth Circuit. I mean, it was a long, slow road to leave her parents' house, but she had integrity. She had an incredible work ethic. She had, by the way, a little bit of help from a sister who was working in the Clinton administration, had that support. But even beyond that, she had the talent, she had the goods, and she kept at it. And now the other thing is, it might not work out the way you were originally planned, but it works out eventually. Maybe you don't, I mean, I think about somebody I went to high school with who is valedictorian and a star, only one kid from my high school ever went to Harvard a year. They never took more than one kid. By the way, obviously there's more to life than Harvard, but this is a handy
Yeah,
example.
sure. Yeah.
And there was a kid who was the captain of the football team who was a pretty good student. They took him. It was just bad luck that she was in a grade with a star quarterback who had
Yep.
good grades. And she went to some perfectly fantastic school, went to
Mhm.
Harvard Law School. It all worked out. The
You figured it out.
luck did not break
Yeah.
her way that first time, but everything did, her talent, her effort, her work, it did work out. So I mean, again, there's so much more to life than Harvard, but since it is this,
No, but it's a good proxy for like the things we want that we can't always get,
yes,
right?
that's exactly
And
right.
I think, I'm thinking about the audience here, right? And I have a ninth grade, a daughter who just started ninth grade. I have a daughter who's just going into her senior year of college. I have so much empathy for like how much we worry about where our kids are headed and how much we just get attached to what happened today. Right? What did you get on that test? What did I saw this comment from your teacher. And I think that, books like yours, like just help people kind of zoom out and see how it's just always unfolding, right? And even the kid who's crushing it one minute may not the next, the kid who doesn't feel like it's going their way, there's time is on their side.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also thought, it took me a very long time to write this book for one reason or another, but in the end, I was glad it did because it became a meditation. And I think this is helpful for parents who think they want success for their kids. It became a meditation on the nature of success itself, which, just as you say, there are people in this book who were at the height of their professions, being invited to award dinners left and right when I started the book. And for example, Anne Wojcicki, who founded 23andMe, this incredible, influential, really game-changing genetic testing business. And by the time I was reading the audiobook, it was in bankruptcy. Now, is Anne Wojcicki still a remarkable woman who achieved something incredible? I would say yes. But the metrics of success, they go up and they go down. And I suspect because of who she is, that she has another chapter in her. But even if she doesn't, success can be a moment in time as well. And it can be very fleeting.
I'm going to misquote this, but I think it's from the Bible, like time and circumstance happen to them all, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
it's like that, like no one is immune to
Oh.
forces beyond their control,
And I think your friend and now mine, Jenny Wallace, would say that parents are so desperate for their kids' success, not because it's not because of ego. It's because they want to protect their children from the vicissitudes of an uncertain future. And I completely understand that. I think what I came away from having really gotten into the lives of the people in this book is that although success, is its own reward, it doesn't protect you from so much of the other hardships of life, in part because of luck, in part because, as you say, I mean, it's just I guess the more sappy version of, into every life some rain must fall, and it just doesn't guarantee everything.
There's no getting around it. What you were saying about, I just had a thought about like, why we want our kids to achieve, why we want our kids to succeed, right? And I agree with you, Jenny's argument is 100% right. Like, I think we're worried about the future and where things are going, and that can amp up our anxieties and our wish for control. Also, I had an insight when my older daughter was applying to college. Because I had cared for families in that space for so long. I got very attached to hoping she would be admitted where she wanted to be admitted. And I was like, oh, it's actually not that I really care where she goes to college, it's that I want her to have what she wants. Right. And so it gave me like just a totally different take on, frankly, and I'm not proud of this, families I had been, I think, unfairly critical of, where they're like, really want this one outcome. And I would think like, you need to let it go. This is about your kid, not you. And then I'm like, oh, or you don't want to live with the kid who didn't get the thing they wanted because it's painful. It's painful.
I mean, I know that that's true. Or you think this is, yes. Or right. And by the way, parents can't be afraid of that. They can't be afraid of their child being disappointed because the kids pick up on that. I mean, I'm sure your daughter didn't, but like,
Oh no, I don't know that I handled it well, but it was like such a good
yes,
insight to like be in
yes.
it and then be like, oh, this is where this is coming from for me.
Well, somebody very wise, her name is Lisa Damour, once said something that I frequently quote, which is, you never want to be more upset about something than your kid is that happened to your kid, or more excited about it. And I think the way that
I didn't come up with that. I just requoted that. I just
Oh,
want people.
okay. I always source it to you, but I love it.
Come
But I
on.
think that this idea that if you are frantically worried, or if a parent is just very worried about their child being disappointed, the kid picks up on that. They're picking up on that cue, as opposed to like, you're going to be fine either way. It would be nice if you got into the college of your choice. I hope you do, but like, if the tone all along has to be, ideally, I think, is very measured, very easygoing, and yeah, it's hard because
Yes,
you want your kid to have the thing your child wants, and if they don't do X, Y, and Z, it ain't going to happen, but you can't make them do it. Like,
I
they
think
get to learn on their own timeline, unfortunately.
they do. Actually, one other thought, just by way of like this, I'm just having like my own therapy session with you, and you're my
I'm so
therapist.
enjoying it.
There was a moment with my older daughter where she said she wanted what she wanted, and then she wasn't acting in accordance with that. And I actually, here's a place where I did not mess it up. And I said to her, based on what you say you want, what I understand is you need to do this, this, and this. I don't care what you do, but based on what you're saying you want. That for me felt like a way that I could just sort of like bring personal experience and knowledge of college and how this all works to the table, which I wanted to. But I was like, I don't care how you spend your summer, but given what you've said,
Yeah, you feel
and
like
that,
you need to make sure the information has been heard, and
yep,
then detach.
then
That's
let it go. Yeah, okay, that was one I didn't mess up. Okay. Now, the Bronte sisters run through your book. This is like such a fun thing. And as someone who writes books and constructs books, I was like, oh, this is awesome. Like they are like this like thread that comes all the way through. So I want to think with you about like, tell me about how they found their way in and work that through for us.
Yeah, I love talking about the Brontes. So, in a way, you have to start, like, the answer to that question starts in my own childhood.
Mm.
Because my parents traveled a lot for work, and I, would stay with family friends, who all had their own cultures around like enrichment, and some of them did math problems at the table and talked about current events. So I got very interested in like, oh, some families really try to make their kids smarter, like I was interested in that. And I also, because I was interested in families who had that kind of culture of enrichment and achievement, I loved the Brontes. I was a big reader. I loved reading their fiction, but I also was always really curious because about how they came out of one family. Because if you read um, Charlotte Bronte and Emily Bronte, and they also have a third sister, Anne Bronte, who was a fantastic novelist in her own right. Their work is so different, and yet it's all extraordinary and novel. And I just wondered, what did they do in that household? Like, what happened exactly? So when I started reading biography after biography, they were such a complicated family, and I won't go into all of it now, but so much of what happened in their family provided themes that I noticed in other families. Like, their father was this extraordinary immigrant from Ireland. We think of the Brontes as being so English, but in fact, Patrick Bronte, their father, was an Irish immigrant who had come from like a dirt house, dirt poor in Ireland, to a scholarship student at Cambridge. So he was like what I called an overcomer, like a parent who had done something extraordinary and set the stage. The siblings were extremely close, and their creative lives were very, very intertwined. They wrote tons and tons of books together based on these imaginary worlds they created. They even wrote magazines about the current events of the worlds they were writing about that had wars and romances. They wrote editorials. They bounced off of each other, and they competed with each other, and they inspired each other, and they collaborated. And it even came down to a professional level, at which point Charlotte basically said to her sisters, "You got any poetry? We should publish a book." Because their brother, who'd been the great hope of the family, another theme in these kinds of books, had an alcohol addiction, and he was failing fast, and they realized they couldn't pin their hopes on their brother. So the sister dynamics, brother sister dynamics, sibling dynamics, father, role modeling, there was just so much going on in there. And so yeah, and they also all wrote about child rearing because they had all been nannies at some point. And so if you read all of their works, realizing that they themselves had done so much childcare, none of them were ever parents, but they all had done childcare and they had really strong opinions about it. And that comes through in their writing as well. So I loved, and it's very personable. It's not like literary,
Yeah.
they're very likable. They're very funny. And
Yeah.
I just love them so much.
Well, and it's such a like fun like piece of the book to like gain this like cultural knowledge about this family, right? It's like just such a neat,
I
illuminating and also just sort of enriching in its own right.
I loved it. And I mean, I recommend the Bronte letters to anyone. These women were very funny
I
and
love
very
it.
real and really wore their hearts on their sleeves. Yeah.
Oh man. Okay. Now you do the most beautiful job of bringing in science and research to, kind of be another conversation partner in this book. What were some of the findings in science that like really like surprised you or were brought to life by these stories or not? Like didn't fit with what the stories were saying?
I was really interested in the idea that people have actually tried to study whether siblings deliberately differentiate or not. There's some really interesting findings. I didn't know this before I wrote my book, and I have twins, so this was never an issue for me. But apparently, study after study after study, the best conducted studies, they all find that the oldest sibling tends to have an academic edge and maybe even the highest IQ. And they think that's for two reasons. One is that the oldest child in a family is the only child in a family of siblings who's ever an only child. So they had that deep, deep focus, and enrichment from their parents for many months or even years of their lives that their other siblings didn't benefit from. And then it seems to accelerate when the kids get to be school age. And there's some thinking that the oldest child teaches younger siblings and that that's a way of consolidating knowledge and learning. So that was interesting in and of its own right. But also other people have found that younger siblings therefore tend to be overrepresented in sports relative to older siblings. The idea being that kids kind of seek out a niche for themselves where they can excel and not feel encroached upon. And the first chapter of the book really, I couldn't believe it when a young Sarah True is an Olympic triathlete and world class Ironman winner. Her older brother and sister were tremendous students. Her sister is Lauren Groff, the award-winning, many times National Book Award nominated novelist. And Sarah basically said to me, I knew I could surpass them in sports, in swimming, in athletics. And they weren't interested in it. Like Lauren, by the way, Lauren Groff was a junior Olympic swimmer. She could have been an Olympic swimmer probably, but that wasn't her passion. And so Sarah says that she deliberately made a choice to pursue another place where she could excel. Talk about the long arc of life, how things come and talent will out. I mean, Sarah's now getting a PhD in psychology. Like she will be the most highly educated academic member of her family by the time they're all in their mid 40s. But as a young person, she felt intimidated by their academic prowess. And so she differentiated. I thought that was all really interesting. It's something for parents to keep an eye on. Parents also, I think, we know that they do reinforce this idea that the oldest child is the most academic and that can have repercussions for younger siblings. You kind of want to be aware of it and not let that become the ingrained family narrative. So I thought that was really powerful. All the work about and the idea that siblings also influence each other academically in general. There's really good research that finds that older siblings who happen to have been born at such a time that they're the oldest kid in their grade,
Yep.
which is totally a random factor. It's not something that their parents generally impose. Their siblings tend to do better in school also, regardless of when their birthday falls in the calendar.
That's interesting.
It's this trickle down effect. So it's, first of all, this finding is fairly recent. It was extremely well conducted. And what it tells us is that family interventions that can help one student succeed have a bigger bang for their buck than we realize, because a rising tide really does lift all boats in a family. So if parents can help one, sibling thrive, then the younger siblings are going to benefit from that as well. I thought that was really interesting and a new idea. And also, we know that kids who are like right on the cusp of getting into a more selective college than maybe their demographic would suggest. So in other words, kids who's like sort of roll of the dice, do they get in, do they don't get in? When they do get in, their
Mhm.
younger siblings also aim higher for a
Hmm.
more selective college than would ordinarily be expected. So I think it's that those kinds of findings have insights for not just parents, but also policymakers when we think about how to help kids succeed. It should be a question about family to some degree.
And is it like identity? Like, these kids who are older are good at school. So like, I'm a school kid, we're a school kid family. Like, is it that? What do we think is happening here?
You know, what's really interesting is we don't exactly know the mechanism. We do know that the sibling effect, I find this fascinating, is more powerful in less economically advantaged families. And there's some thinking that in those families, the kids simply spend more time together. One's not being driven off to tennis while the other one is at the oboe lesson. Like they're just hanging out around the house together a lot more. But there's also been some sociological research that finds that middle class and upper middle class families value individualism more and they encourage that differentiation more. And obviously it's just a matter of time, and if your kids are spending lots and lots of time together, that sibling effect is going to be more powerful than if you're each being encouraged to go off and do your own thing.
Yep. No, it makes sense. It makes sense. What about birth order research? People put a lot behind that, but I think,
I love birth order research because it is one of the most counterintuitive findings that I came across in the book. We all have this idea that the oldest child, of course, is the most conscientious. But a lot of the research that's been done, and also, by the way, people have all kinds of ideas. They'll say things to you like, "Well, my middle child is the middle child, so of course he's the most difficult." And then you'll meet somebody else at a party, and they'll say, "Well, my middle child, he's the peacemaker, he's a delight because he's a middle child." So we all have these narratives that we tell each other about why people are the way that they are. But the best, most thoroughly conducted research finds that really there are not a lot of correlates of personality with birth order. And the main reason for that is it's sort of the same idea about how parents overestimate their own influence on their children when there are so many other factors like, luck and siblings. It's your birth order is one of so many factors in your life. There's who you are at school, there's what's your natural talent, that's were your parents divorced when you were 3 versus, it, the research found that the oldest child was the most conscientious because at a moment in time, the oldest child is always the most conscientious. But by the time, because they're the oldest. But if you then measure it again when that 14-year-old is also 18, the 14-year-old might be just as, if not more so. Do we all fall into patterns in our household? Yes, we do. But I don't know if this is true for you, Lisa, but who I am when I'm with my siblings is really different from who I am when I'm in a workplace or a professional setting. So all of that is really interesting to me. And I think also helpful in general, parents, to the extent that they cannot stereotype their kids or make snap judgments about who they are and why they are, that's helpful. So it was a surprise to me to find that so much birth order research is there's not that much there is the bottom line. But it's still, I think people will still keep studying it and we'll probably get some nuance around it over time as well.
I love it. Um, it's funny, like writing a book is like it's almost like having a kid, I think. Like you get very attached to it in a lot of different ways. As you look at this book, go back through it when you do, like, are there parts that you're like, this cracks me up every time, or this gets me upset every time? Or like, are there moments in the book that you have a strong emotional reaction to?
Well, it's funny. It actually does come back to, maybe it's because of where I was in my own life with my own kids when I was writing the book, but it comes back to this. There's a story, it comes back to college admissions. And there's a moment in the Chen family. The mother was very difficult and very controlling, but she also worked extremely long hours at a Chinese restaurant that she owned with her husband. And so the kids, to some degree, raised each other. They were the ones who told each other which AP courses to take and which teacher to try to get. They read all each other's college essays. And one of the brothers really was desperate to go to a very select school. And his sister, who was quite a bit older and had done a large part of raising him, was very involved in helping him through that process and translating America to him, and even translating their mother to him, because he was raised in America, and so his Chinese was not as good as, and his mother's English wasn't very good. He wrote his college essay about his sister. So there's this moment when she is already in medical school, she's at the lab, and she's trying to find out whether he was accepted or not. And they're on the phone, and he's away at like a band recital or something, and she's telling him, well, what's your PIN number so I can log on? And he couldn't remember it. And she's screaming at him, you're an idiot, you don't deserve to get in. We've all been there with teenage boys.
Yeah.
And so there's just this moment when she finally puts the PIN number in, and it gets me every time. It just said, congratulations, this huge banner. And she just wept. And because she told me that she felt like if he didn't get in, that maybe it was a reflection on her and that she wasn't good enough. And it was just such a touching sibling story. So you can see, I don't know why I get so
No, I got it too. I got it too. I'm with you. I'm with you. Yeah.
it's I think people sometimes are off put by the very concept of a book that's about achievement. Like, oh, it's going to be about how to be a gunner and how to like elbow out the competition, and oh, success is everything. But I actually think the reason I love the families in my book so much is that I was really able to capture the tremendous heart in the stories. Like, these families have so much heart, and I only wrote about families whom I personally admired, because I thought, if I have to spend all this time with them, I might as well enjoy them and like them. And I really do feel like it's a privilege. It was a privilege for me to get to know these various families who are so full of love and dreams and hope. And I found them quite inspiring. And I do hope that parents of every stripe will find something to be inspired by about parenting or about family or about love, in the stories that I included.
I think they will. I think they will. So actually, let me ask you one more question, then I'm going to toss this over to Gilda, who I know will have some important questions for you. Okay, so what do you want folks to take from this? Parents, grandparents, educators, what's the take home that if people took one or two ideas away from this book, what would you want them to be?
I think I finally have like nailed what my hope is. I think parents need to help their children believe that if they want to reach for the moon, who better than you? The moon is there. It's for you to reach for, and A, go for it, and B, let me know how I can help, without getting overly involved. And there's the moon. You want it, go for it. If you don't want to reach for the moon, that is also okay. You don't need to do it to please me. And so it's this balance, I think, between helping your child understand that the impossible can be done, and you got to believe you can do it in order to even really realistically try, but that it's not to please me. And if you don't want it, there's lots of ways to be wonderful in the world without that. So it's about letting there be space for those dreams without making them feel like an imperative.
Love it.
Love it.
Thank you for writing this book. Thank you. Thank you.
Love
Thank
it.
you.
So much wisdom here. I know Jessica and I'm just really, I
Yeah.
hear about watch parties. I'm hearing from so many people. So much good here. Jessica, I'll toss it to you for the first question.
Sure. Thank you, Gilda. So one thing I didn't mention in the intro, or Gilda didn't mention in the intro, is that I'm a mother first, right? So I have my 3 children. I have a sophomore in high school, an 8th grader, and a 5th grader. So the whole time I took myself off camera, but the whole time I was going, oh my gosh, just nodding and listening to you as we're going through. And I think one of the things that I struggle with on a regular basis, and maybe it's stuff you've talked about, so I'll try to form this as a question, but see if you have any additional insight to add into this thought. But I feel like I'm constantly trying to balance this concept of, how do I build you up in your confidence and your esteem and your self-image in a way that allows you, because I love how you concluded there of like, here's the moon, if you want to go for it, why not you? But how to balance that building of self-esteem and confidence, and encouraging that idea to reach further without it coming as an expectation or a feeling that I'll be disappointed if you don't, right? And so I've tried to land in a place where I've got, and I also learned as a parent over the last 15, 16 years is that as soon as you think you've got it figured out, like the next hour changes and you don't, right? So like they're different, they need different things and each kid needs different things, right? But I've tried to just go to a place of like, my ultimate goal is your happiness. My ultimate goal is that every door that you possibly would want to walk through is open for you and that you keep those doors open. And so that's why we're going through that so that they're not closed for you, but you're choosing. If you choose not to go in that door, fine, great. But you didn't accidentally shut doors on yourself in the process. So I don't know, that balance between like kind of getting outside your comfort zone to feel confident to go after things versus the expectation that you better do it or I'll be disappointed. Any
Um,
thoughts on that?
I'll do this quickly and then
Yeah.
I'll toss it to Lisa because I'm sure she has really sophisticated thoughts about this.
Yeah.
But it's funny, by the way, I relate. My son is right outside this door to my right, and that is exactly the language I always use. I just want you to keep your doors open.
Yeah.
Um, so the thing about expectations, it comes back to something else that you said, which is, your kid is changing all the time, and you've got to really know your kid. And I
Mhm.
think setting reasonable expectations is about knowing your kid and starting with your kid rather than
Right.
starting with the expectations. I mean, somebody
Yeah.
who interviewed me actually said to me, I don't understand it. I set such high expectations for my daughter. She met them at every turn. I set the same expectations for her younger brother, and he didn't. Like, where did I go wrong? And I
Mhm.
thought to myself, that's not where you start. It's like if he's not meeting those expectations, chances are he might not every kid is destined to be the valedictorian, or whatever it
Mhm.
is that she was dreaming of. So expectations are nuanced and they have to be set according to a kid's ability, because if you set them too high, we know that is a breeding ground for anxiety and depression.
Mhm.
So I think it's about knowing your child and setting realistic ambitions and making sure that they're meeting all of their potential without having some arbitrary ideal that you would like that child to reach. But what do you
Right.
think, Lisa? I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, so it's funny, like the way I'm thinking about it a little bit is I don't know that outcome versus process is exactly the right headline, but it's like sort of in that department. When we look at the research on adult well-being, like adults who go on to be, happy, or people who are, have what we would call happiness as adults, like a lot of it is rooted in being a conscientious person, right? That they
Mhm.
are good workers, and so they have, they feel good about their work because they do it well. They're conscientious, they have good relationships because they don't cheat or lie, they don't hang out with people who cheat and lie. They find meaning in their work because they are conscientious people who want to do something that is meaningful, like that's actually really what's, kind of often the childhood precursor of adult well-being. And so when I think about, Jessica, what you're asking around, like, how do I make sure the doors are open and whatever without seeming to put pressure? I think that maybe the here and now is like put pressure on conscientiousness right today, right?
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
do the work, do it well, be honest, be a good friend, be a decent person. I'm going to ask you that right here, right now. That will happen to leave doors open. Like that will have the impact of leaving doors open, but it
Mhm.
is detached from like what comes of all of that.
Right. Right.
And so I think sometimes that, I guess that's how I would
Yeah.
frame it. Like, don't
I
worry
really love
about it.
that. Yeah.
Have a good person in your house right now and make a big deal of things like lying and make a big deal of things like being a jerk, right? Like I would throw down about those much more than I would throw down about, you didn't make the team.
Right, right. No, I think that I actually was thinking a lot about that idea of also parenting shifting from outcome and even educational shift from only focusing on outcomes to thinking about process and reflection, right? And resilience and growth and those pieces. I think it relates to both spheres, right? And a lot of our society, we can be focused only on those outcomes and those achievements, and we need to celebrate those, but we need to really appreciate. And I think having children that have different levels of success, that things, some things come really easy to one it's, you know, the other work's extremely hard and it's very, very challenging. But so I've learned to really try to celebrate the process and the growth, and that is what we celebrate versus just, you know, what's the letter grade or what is, you know, yeah. So thank you. I think that's super helpful.
So,
Gilda, do you want to, your turn?
so much wisdom. I just, I'm taking pages of notes. I loved what you said about they want to please us because they respect us. That I think is just mind blowing. So how do we make that happen? Every single time we have a GPS, the nugget here is it's all about the relationship you have with your child. It starts here, it ends here. Tell us your takeaways, your two wonderful authors, about what do we need to keep in mind when we talk about building that all important relationship.
Wow, that is such a, I mean, obviously that's sort of the whole ball game, as you say. And I think a lot of it, I mean, I was writing a book about achievement. So my thoughts turn to how do you keep that relationship intact in light of this kind of question of achievement. And I do think that where I land is just having your child know that you value them independent of those things, and that there are lots of ways to have a meaningful life, and that there's not this one path. And I do think it's about making time, you know, people, because I wrote a book about siblings, people often ask me about favoritism, right? Because that can be a really toxic phenomenon in um, family life. And, you know, my advice about that is, if I think people don't talk about favoritism enough. I think it's real. I think when parents are feeling that, they and they're honest with themselves, they need to carve out time alone with the child who, you know, is feeling maybe less favored, because that time alone, that one-on-one is so, I say this as a mother of twins from experience, that one-on-one has been so important. And I think people love the idea sometimes of like the family unit, we do everything together. But I think kids really crave being seen as individuals. And if they know that you see them and you get them and you value them for who they are outside of their accomplishments, that your relationship has a strong foundation.
Dr. Damour?
It's so interesting, Gilda. Like in the time that we've been working together, my work has changed so much, and it was like largely the pandemic, right? That, you know, people were interested in adolescence before it, and then adolescent mental health concerns, you know, absolutely blew up, and that's changed the nature of my work. And I'm now trying to do a lot of work around public mental health around adolescence. And the thing that I will say over and over and over again to anyone who will listen is the single most powerful force for adolescent mental health is strong relationships with caring adults. Like full stop, all day, whole ball game. And, you know, and sometimes I get tired of saying it that way. I'll say, look, in real estate, we say location, location, location. With kids, it's relationship, relationship, relationship. Like it is the whole ball game, as Susan said. Um, what I will say, and this is like basically a very like, so here's how I've walked up to this question. I think a lot of what gets in the way of relationships between kids and parents, and especially in adolescence, is the adult not understanding how adolescence typically unfolds. That, you know, we know how teenagers roll. And I'm so excited to come back in October to talk about Untangled, because my book Untangled was basically like what to expect when you're expecting a teenager, you know, and actually not just girls, like it's pretty much across the board. Because where I find the relationship often coming to grief between kids and teenagers is that parents and teenagers, the teenager acts like a teenager and the parent takes it personally.
Totally.
And so then, you know, not hilarity ensues. So I think a lot of how we fortify and have good working relationships with kids is to see development as its own force that will unfold in its own right, change the person in front of us, not always in ways we like, but we're still there to provide loving support as that kid is working through a very challenging phase of development. So I think that you could do across all of development. Like 3-year-olds act like 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds act like 4-year-olds, 13-year-olds, they act like 13-year-olds. Like the more you understand about what you are walking into, it is so much more easier to stay connected to that kid.
Exactly. You know, when I think about Dr. Damour, I mean, people say, tell me in a nutshell, what's Dr. Damour talk about? And Susan, I know as her dear friend, I love what you talk about when you remind us all, good mental health is feeling the appropriate emotion at the appropriate time. I just have to repeat that. If your child's best friend moves away, you will have a sad child. This is good mental health. If your child didn't study for a test, they'll probably be disappointed. Now, what do we do? What do we do? We sit down. How am I doing? We sit down and we help them go through, learn the skills. What did we learn? That's just a huge one. I also love when you also talk to us about how we have to be there and collect their emotional trash, and then potentially go ahead and then you call a friend and how am I doing so far with my Lisa Damour?
Good, but we gotta get back to Susan.
Okay,
It's
well,
all
okay,
good.
well,
I love hearing it.
you know, this could go on all day, Susan and Jessica and everybody else. And on October 30th, Lisa, you will be back with, you mentioned Susan, Jennifer Wallace with her book, Never Enough. She will be doing the interviewing this time. So everybody,
It's a party. It's a party at
it's a
GPS.
party. It's
So
always a
much
party
fun.
here at GPS. So thank you, ladies. Thank you, everyone. We've got several watch parties and I'm seeing all the love. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.